Hi guys, James at RampantLionReviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one we are going to stick to Sweden and we're going to return to a brewery that has featured on the channel a couple of times before. I've had some nice beers from these guys over the years. This will be review number 5 or so if memory serves me correctly, and those have all been, different styles so far. But the one that we're going to have a look at today is the first beer that I'm having from them in a can, and it's also a sub-style that I really enjoy. So fingers crossed it's another good one. Hopefully it makes for an interesting review, and I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this beer as well. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to head over to the southeast of Sweden, to Kalmar, which is a lovely city that I recommend you visit if you get the chance, and we're going to have a look at another beer from Ängö Kvartersbryggeri, who release their beers under the name Ängöl. But this particular beer is called the Ängöl Nz Ipa, as the Swedes might call it, or the Ängöl New Zealand IPA as I would call it. It comes in at 6.5% ABV, and this one is a hazy New England, whatever you want to call it, New Zealand IPA. So yeah, this should be really interesting. As you'll know if you've watched the channel before, I'm a massive fan of New Zealand hops. I first encountered those when I was out in New Zealand back in 2015, and they've got a real diversity of things out there. There's no natural predators in New Zealand for hops, so they just kind of went wild and grew lots and lots and developed lots of different varieties and things. So there's a very exciting hop scene down in New Zealand actually, if you get the chance to go there, and I hope that I can go back and visit it again sometime soon. But yeah, as I say, this is my 5th beer that I've had from Ängöl. The last 2 beers were both IPAs. One was a West Coast and one was a New Englander. Before that we had a berry sour, if I remember rightly, maybe a Berliner Weisse, and then the very first beer that I tried from these guys was quite a few years ago. That was a big Dunkel or Doppelbock or something like that. But yeah, really cool to return to these guys. This beer was released as part of the local Småskalig assortment through Systembolaget here in Sweden for June of 2021. The main reason I got this one was because I hadn't had anything from Ängöl in quite a while, and it's a New Zealand IPA. As I say, I love New Zealand hops. But yeah, curious to see how it turns out, and hopefully it's another interesting beer. So let's crack on then. As always with my reviews, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Ängö Kvartersbryggeri before, and we will no doubt add some more to that list at some point in the near future. But there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The whole channel, of course, has a geography-based tagging system, so you can go into the homepage and search for beer based on country, city, state, county, province, prefecture, whatever it is you happen to be interested in. Do check out the playlists of beers from different countries. There is one there for all the Swedish beers that I've reviewed for you. That's constantly being added to, and as always, please do get in touch and let me know some of the other beers and breweries that you guys would like to see me review. It's always great to hear from you guys that are watching the videos, and the support that you show the channel is hugely appreciated. So anyway, to tell you a little bit about Ängö Kvartersbryggeri then, on to my brewery notes. So Ängö Kvartersbryggeri, as I've mentioned to you already, are based in Kalmar, which is in the southeast of Sweden in the historic Småland province, which doesn't exist legally anymore, but it is a historic province, and you find this basically right in the kind of southeastern corner of the country. But the brewery itself was founded back in 2010 by Kalmar local Johan Håkansson, who had been homebrewing since 1993. But the brewery was originally based in an old farmhouse in the Ängö district of Kalmar, hence the name. But this used to be home to a company called Nz Blomqvist Tunnbinderi, and they produced casks and kegs for local breweries and bars around the Kalmar area. But this company went out of business in 1968, and thereafter the building was used simply as a storage warehouse. But the building underwent extensive renovations in 2009 and 2010 to become home to the brewery, and it was equipped with a 1600 litre copper-clad brew kit from Austria with fermentation tanks on the next floor up, and when they were using this facility it gave them an annual output of around 100,000 litres. Over the following years, of course, they continued to build up their reputation and their fermentation capacity, but in April of 2016 they moved to a new premises, the old Jemax factory in Polhelmsgatan, which is kind of in the middle of an industrial estate actually. It's quite an impressive facility if you see it. I've driven past that but not been in to take a look. But this facility gives them an output of around 500,000 litres of beer beer per annum, and it also means that the beers can be distributed nationally as well. Over the last few years, they've continued to build up their fermentation capacity and increase their output, but they've been attending various different beer festivals and adding new beers to their repertoire. As of June 2021, when I'm filming this review for you, these guys have produced around 45 different kinds of beer, and they've also started putting them in cans quite recently as well. But yeah, that's all I can really tell you about these guys for the moment. If you want to learn more about them, you can check out the brewery website. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can of course check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn a little bit more about all the different beers that they've done. So yeah, I guess we can get on and have a taste of this one then. So I'll just let you have a little look at the artwork on this one before we open it up. The artwork on this is a little bit different compared to what I've had from the Ängöl beers before, or the Ängö Kvartersbryggeri, however you want to refer to these guys. But yeah, I do have to admit, I quite like this. But yeah, 440ml can. I paid, I think, 45 Swedish kronor for this one, which translates to roughly €4.50, about £4 sterling, and I guess somewhere in the region of $5.25 American. Just so those of you watching in different places across the world have a little bit of a price with this one. But yeah, looks very nice. So it says on the back here, a modern, naturally hazy IPA, fully supported with different hop sorts from New Zealand. This beer fits well with spare ribs or other grilled food, or just on its own. Yeah, so just as it is basically. So yeah, hope my translation was right there. But yeah, a little bit difficult to think spontaneously with Swedish still, even though I've passed my gymnasium Swedish, but that's that. Still feel that there's big holes in my vocabulary, but I think it works. But yeah, nicely presented beer, this one, as I said. Huge fan of the New Zealand hops. 6.5% hazy New England style, this one. So let's get it out and we'll get on with the tasting then. Very curious to see what this has in store for us. So yeah, my first Ängöl beer in about 9 months or something, as I said. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm a huge fan of New Zealand hops. I was in New Zealand back in 2015, I want to say. And so I got to try quite a few different beers from the likes of, you know, Behemoth and a few of the other New Zealand breweries down there when I was in Auckland and stuff. I really want to go back to New Zealand and explore a little bit around Wellington and things. Wellington is supposed to be an awesome beer city, incidentally. But yeah, I've got some favourite New Zealand hop varieties. You know, you've got Raka, which is lovely, Riwaka, Motueka. There's a whole host of different New Zealand hops down there. No natural predators for hops in New Zealand, hence why they've grown so many different varieties and developed so many different things. So yeah, you can have a very good time if you go to New Zealand on a craft beer holiday, let's just say that. But yeah, as you can see, with this beer then, it's poured a lovely, I would say, kind of light yellow colour. It almost looks a little bit like a kind of Munich Helles or something like this, come to think of it. But yeah, in terms of the head has gone down a little bit. This beer poured with about a 2/3 finger of a frothy, I would say, perfect white head, and that is going to fade away to just be a very kind of thin, foamy layer over the next little while, I would think. But yeah, it certainly looks the part of a kind of hazy New England style IPA, this one. But yeah, lovely, very bright, light yellow colour. As I've mentioned to you in previous reviews, the colour of your beer is determined by, one, the type of malts that you use. This usually determines the magnitude of your colour. This one, I would guess, might not, probably isn't using any caramel-centric malts like Cara Pils or you know, Cara Munich or something like this, because of that light yellow colour that it's got. But the length of the wort boil is also going to affect it. The longer you boil the wort, the more the sugar's caramelised, thus you get a darker colour of beer. A sort of New England type IPA like this one is going to undergo a wort boil of between 60 to 90 minutes or 70 to 90 minutes. Something along these lines. But adjuncts and barrel aging will of course play a role in determining the colour of your beer as well, but those two factors are not at play in a beer like this. So yeah, lovely light yellow colour, this one. It's certainly not the haziest of New Englands that I've come across. It's certainly got more of a kind of natural haze type vibe to it, this one. But yeah, it should be quite nice. Does it say this one has yeah, wheat and oats in it as well. So usually when it comes to these New England IPAs. The thing that determines the level of haze in these beers would be the oat and the wheat content. The yeast will also play a bit of a role as well, and that just, you know, the level of haziness that you get out of these beers will vary from recipe to recipe, brewery to brewery, and so on. But in terms of a kind of modern IPA, nothing too surprising about this beer in terms of its appearance. So yeah, let's take a closer look at the aroma then and just see how we get on. Certainly interesting looking beer, this one, when you consider, you know, it does look a little bit more like a Helles in some ways, but you know, you will get IPAs that are this colour, so nothing overly surprising about the beer when you consider what style it is in terms of its appearance. That's what I wanted to say. Brain's not working because I'm a bit tired, but there we go. So aroma time for this one then. Ooh, that smells quite nice. So first off, I'm going to say this one comes across as quite a light, bready New England IPA in terms of its aroma. There's a few different directions, I would say 6, that you can take a New England IPA in. They can be more sort of farmhousey and yeasty. They can be a little bit more rye leaning and grainy. They can be wheaty and bitey. They can be oaty and creamy. They can be a little bit more barley malt leaning and bready, and they can also be a little bit kind of brown sugary leaning and sweet, you know, caramelly or biscuity. But yeah, this one comes across with a little bit. It comes across as a little bit yeasty, little touch wheaty, and then quite barley malt leaning beyond that. So yeah, quite a bready leaning New England hazy, this one in my opinion. So yeah, the aroma I think works out very, very well in this beer. But yeah, it's interesting, this for sure. We'll come to the fruits in a little minute, because that's what we're going to focus on with these IPAs, I should say. But yeah, the backbone of this beer is definitely quite soft and white bready. You can smell that in there. There's a nice little bit of a bread crusty quality, of course. Yeah, so nice, smooth, white bready, soft, kind of crisp white bready character to it, I would say. A little bit of bread crust in there. You can smell a little bit of the wheaty bitiness at the very back of the nose, and you also have a little bit of a kind of smoother oaty character coming out of it as well. But yeah, the aroma to this one, I think, works out very, very nicely. You do get one or two little hints of a very slight Werther's Original kind of butter candy type note out of it, but yeah, it goes together really well in that sense. It's as I say, a soft, light, kind of bready leaning New England IPA. This one is a little bit more about the it's a little bit more about the kind of soft bready malts and the barley malt, rather than the oats and the wheat and things. There's a little bit of wheat in there, like I say, and a little bit of oat, but more about the barley malt in my opinion. So yeah, it smells like it's quite a straight shooting malt base, but I think that's going to be interesting when it comes to the taste of the beer. But yeah, should be quite nice. But yeah, on the hoppy side of things then, which of course is where our focus should be, and when it comes to New Zealand hops, one of the really interesting things about these is that quite a lot of them tend to be quite low in alpha acid. I mean, if you think about the Motueka, I think that's about 8% alpha acid, if memory serves me correctly, whereas if you compare it to its American counterpart, the limey hops, you know, it would be more, the American one, I think, that, you know, Equinox is, I think, about 14% alpha acid, come to think of it. You know, you've got several low alpha acid hops like, you know, Rakau, Riwaka, and things like this. There's a load of different hops down there that aren't even coming into my mind at the moment from New Zealand. But yeah, quite a lot of New Zealand hops are low in alpha acid, but they'll give you beautiful, big, fruity aromas. You know, Nelson Sauvin is a beast though. It's about 16% alpha acid. It's a monster. But yeah, you can certainly pick out some of these lovely fruity characters from this beer as soon as you open it up. But on the green side of things then, there's a wee touch of a light earthiness to this one, for sure, on the green component. There's a bit of a kind of bright floral aromaticity in there. I wouldn't describe it as being spicy, but I would describe it as being quite bright. And you've also got a nice kind of, you've also got a lighter sort of grassy component to it as well. But yeah, the grassy side of things is a little bit citrusy and zesty. yeah, I think the green component for me actually comes across as quite, I think overall it leans towards that kind of bright floral side of things. There's just a little bit of kind of softer grassiness underneath it and a light earthiness too. So the green component isn't too pungent in this one. Overall, I would say the vibe of this IPA comes across as being quite relaxed, so I'm thinking it will show a bit more kind of bite and things in the flavour itself. But let's look at the fruity part of the beer. So yeah, this one for me, it's got a good balance between a kind of softer tropical fruit, but also a little bit of a more kind of zesty leaning sort of thing in this one. It's difficult to say. I've got a feeling there might be Motueka in this, because it has got a bit of that limey presence to it, and to me the most obvious candidate for that would be Motueka. That was why I was talking about that early on. So for me with this one, it does have quite a bit of an oily, limey character to it for sure. So I think Motueka in this. I mean, behind that you've got some lovely soft tropical notes in there. There's a good bit of apricot in this one for me. You do get a little hint of a mango as well, but I think the mango is quite minimal. For me, the fruity character is mainly a soft apricot, but a little bit of mango, little tiny bit of passion fruit as well at the back of the nose. So I mean, could that be like Raka or Riwaka or something like this? I'm not quite sure. Yeah, there is almost a little bit of a gooseberry note to this one as well, so I'm wondering if there's a bit of Nelson Sauvin in there as well. The thing you have to remember about these New England hazy type IPAs is that they're very reliant on late addition hops. So if you add hops at the early stage of your wort boil, that's going to give you a lot of bitterness. This is what they tend to do with West Coast IPAs, and as you go through the wort boil, as you go along the wort boil, you get a trade-off from bitterness in favour of flavour and aroma. New England IPAs, of course, are overwhelmingly late addition hops or dry hops, although they do put dry hops and late addition hops in West Coast IPAs as well. But yeah, for me, I do pick up a little bit of an oily gooseberry note in this one. There's a bit of a kind of, as I say, quite a zesty, limey character to it, which would make me think Motueka. And then there's some hop that's got a few more tropical properties in it as well. So that could be like Raka or Riwaka or something else. There's quite a few hops from New Zealand, and their names are not coming to me at the moment, I have to say. Probably should have had a little look. There is a very good web page you can look at that's I think it's called nzhops.co.nz, and it lists all the different varieties. There's absolutely loads of them. So there's quite a few different hops the more tropical one could be. But yeah, as I say, soft apricots in there, a little touch of mango, wee tiny bit of passion fruit, I think. But those two, as I say, are quite minimal compared to the smoother apricot-y note that you get out of this beer. But yeah, I think a little touch of an oily gooseberry and a wee bit of a kind of zesty lime in this one. So let's get the rest of this beer into the glass. And I think it's about time that we taste this one, so let's go for it. This one is the New Zealand IPA, coming in at 6.5% ABV, a New Zealand hopped, hazy, New England, whatever you want to call it, IPA from Ängö Kvartersbryggeri in Kalmar, over in Småland in southeast Sweden. Let's get stuck into this one. Slange, skål, cheers. That is pretty nice, actually. It's pretty solid as well. So you can see this beer, it has got a little bit more haze to it since I put the rest of it into the glass, actually. So you can see that it has got a little bit hazier. See if I put my fingers behind the glass there. But yeah, this one is a really nice, drinkable beer. The thing I remember about the IPAs that I've had from Ängö before is that they tend to have a little bit of a slickness and oiliness to them, and you still get that out of these beers. And I'm sure if I drank Ängö a little bit more regularly, I could probably taste them blind and recognise them, because it is a characteristic that I remember of their beers. They like a little bit of a malty sweetness and a wee bit of a kind of oiliness to their beers just from memory with them, and that kind of shines through with this particular beer as well. But yeah, this one is pretty solid. It's as good as the other IPAs that we've had from them before. Obviously a little bit different with these New Zealand hops though, but yeah, thumbs up to Ängö for this one. This is a solid kind of easy drinking beer. I don't know how easy it would be for them to do this one on a regular basis. I don't know how easy it is for them to get hold of hops, to get a hold of Kiwi hops up here in Sweden, but yeah, this would be a good core IPA. It's kind of like that for sure. But yeah, first impressions of it are that it's got, as I say, it leans a little bit more towards the zesty, the citrusy zesty kind of things, and we could kind of pick that up a little bit from the aroma. It takes a little bit more time for the tropical notes to come out, and the malt base is a little bit kind of sweeter and more biscuit and caramelly. Those are the two distinctions I would make with this one in comparison with the aroma. But let's try and break it down a little bit more for you and describe it a bit more in detail. It is a nice beer. So straight away with this one, you can feel that nice kind of soft white bready quality just blanket in the middle of your palate. And the malt base is quite straight shooting in this one. I would say that this is quite a straight shooting IPA overall. It's not going to blow the head off you in terms of complexity. It's one of these ones that's just straightforward, nicely crafted. Nothing wrong with that. But yeah, base layer on that middle third of your palate, you can feel that soft but still quite crisp white bready character. You will notice that as you go further into the aftertaste, it develops a little touch of graininess there, particularly down the middle line of your tongue in that middle third of your palate. And on top of that, of course, you get those soft white bready notes. If you go to either end of that middle third of your palate, you will get a wee bit of a kind of bread crusty type quality coming out of the beer, and you can feel a little bit of a kind of smooth wheaty layer sitting on top of that. The other thing I would say about this one is that the oats are not all that noticeable in this beer. It's almost like in the middle third of your palate, as I say, you get like a small oval sitting there on top of the middle line of your tongue, and that just gives you a lovely kind of, there's a little bit of a kind of smooth, pardon me, oaty character there. And the way that you notice the oats is that you can feel the middle of your palate just getting a little bit sweeter. You can feel that just coming out a little bit more the further you go into the aftertaste. If you go to the dead centre of your palate though, you get a little circle where there's a kind of slightly more concentrated, almost brown sugary element to this one. And I would go as far as saying that it's like a proper caramel actually, which is quite interesting, because usually in New England IPAs like this you get a bit more of a kind of butter candy, Werther's Original type thing, but this one's quite interesting. I really do get a wee bit of a sweet caramel out of them, but I remember this a similar thing from some of the beers that I've had before. I've had one or two of their beers on tap actually, and I've had two, as I say, I've had two IPAs that I've reviewed on the channel before. But like I say, the main thing with the malt base that's different in this beer for me is that you do get a wee bit more of a kind of brown sugary note and things in this beer in the beginning, but the malt base starts to lean towards that more bready, soft kind of character the further that you go into the aftertaste with it. So yeah, it does get a big kind of thumbs up from me, this one. On the malty side things, straight shooting, but does what you want it, and it just dries out a little bit the further you go into the aftertaste. But yeah, awesome. So let's move on to the back third of the palate with this one then. So the border region between middle third and back third of your palate, you can feel it kind of just builds up a little bit. You do get a wee bit of a kind of bready build up there and a bit more of a bread crusty element. But if you go into that back third of your palate, you can feel some of the wheaty elements. You can feel a little bit more of the wheaty element just coming out of this one underneath. So as you push towards the back, the very back of your tongue there, you do start to get a little bit more of a bitiness out of the wheat, which I can certainly appreciate. So yeah, it's interesting how that goes together. So on top of that though, you can feel there is a little bit of the kind of yeasty element of the beer, but this beer is actually quite a light and kind of crisp leaning IPA in my opinion. I'm noticing on that, if you go back to the middle third of your palate and you just go into the back half of it, I do notice a little bit of a dryness coming out of this one. So I wonder, could there be a wee touch of Pilsner malt in here of some description? You just feel a little bit of that. But anyway, back to the back third of your palate, sitting on top of that kind of wheaty layer that we have, and the bitey wheaty layer, you can feel the more airy yeasty notes coming out of this one. So if you start from the very back of your palate, you can feel the flavour is a bit tall like this, and it just condenses down a little bit, and as you go into that middle third of your palate, it is quite squashed together as you go further forward. But I certainly like that about this beer for sure. So thumbs up to Ängö Kvartersbryggeri for this. Yeah, nice crisp IPA this one. But let's focus on that hoppy side of things. Yeah, the hoppy side of the beer is very nice actually. I'm biased though, I love these New Zealand hops. But back corners of the palate, there's definitely a little bit of a lighter earthiness there, but as you move further forward, it very quickly becomes nice and bright and floral. I think there is a wee bit of spiciness to this one, and that does make me wonder about, that does kind of confirm to me a little bit. I do think there's a wee bit of Nelson Sauvin in this one. Nelson Sauvin has a hell of a bitter kick to it if you use it as an early edition hop. So I think probably what's going on with this one is that they've maybe used Nelson Sauvin as both a late edition and an early edition hop, because there's just something distinctive and something familiar about the kind of the sort of spicy bitterness in this beer that builds up. You can feel that just sitting underneath everything else the further that you go into the aftertaste with this one. But on top of that, you've got a lighter, kind of brighter floral aromaticity. But yeah, around the front curve of the palate, the beer's a little bit lighter and more grassy, but there's quite a zestiness in there as well. And I think that's probably the work of Mouthfeel. There's just, as I say, I could be completely wrong on the hops. I like playing guess the hops with IPAs. It's a lot more difficult these days than it used to be in the early days of the channel, because there's so many more varieties out there now. But I think with this one, I've got a feeling that there is Nelson Sauvin and Mouthfeel in this one, and that's just, those are probably the two most common New Zealand hops that you'll find used by European breweries these days. But yeah, the zestiness, I think, on the front tip of the palate is a little bit reminiscent of what I've had from Mouthfeel before, and the sort of spiciness in there is a little bit more like Nelson Sauvin. Nelson Sauvin is a big 16% alpha acid beast, so it's, to get a bit of spiciness out of that's no surprising. But yeah, the green component of this one does get gradually more spicy the further that you go into it, and that sort of complements the crisp nature of this beer, I would say. But let's focus on the fruity flavours then. So border region again between front third and middle third of your palate, a little bit of bready build-up, bit of bread crust. The base of that front third of your palate is a little bit more kind of crisp and white bready again, and then sitting on top of that, of course, that's where you get that nice oily bubble where those juicy fruity esters just roll their way out of the beer. So yeah, let's try and pick out these fruity flavours then. But yeah, fruity inside of this beer as well, as I say, it's actually quite similar to what you pick up in the aroma in this one. So in the back half of that front third of your palate, I think there is a little bit of a tropical character, but this beer really leans more towards a kind of more citrusy, zesty kind of thing. But yeah, I do get like a little bit of a very slight apricot-y type note sitting in the back of that front third of your palate, and I do wonder, could that be a little bit of Raka or Riwaka, or Kohatu might be another one. Kohatu's a bit more pineapple-y though, but in fairness, there is maybe a little touch of pineapple sitting on top of that. But yeah, the back half of the front third of your palate is a little bit more, it's just a soft apricot, soft kind of pineapple-y note there. It's almost a little bit dry. It's like a dry fruited flavour that you get out of that. But as you move into the front half of that front third of your tongue, it's interesting because it's quite distinctive. You can feel, as you move just towards the front tip of your palate, you can feel that sort of more oily, gooseberry, white, green, grapey sort of thing, which I heavily suspect is Nelson Sauvin. And on top of that, you can feel a brighter, kind of zestier, but still quite oily, limey note, and I think that's Mouthfeel. So yeah, it's these two hops, as I say, probably the most common New Zealand ones that you'll come across from European breweries at the moment, because Nelson Sauvin's always been popular, but it tends to vary a little bit. But I would not be surprised if there's Mouthfeel and Nelson Sauvin in this, and I think there is something else as well that's a little bit more tropical. But exactly what hop that is, I couldn't tell you. But this beer does lean towards that gooseberry, limey sort of thing, and it's got a wee bit of, the Nelson Sauvin character is a little bit sweeter, but the Mouthfeel is definitely a little bit more sort of zesty, if you like. So yeah, and as I say, I'm guessing those hops, I don't know for sure, but there's just something familiar about the flavours going on in this beer. So I'd be very curious to know what ones they've used actually. I would be curious to know about that. But yeah, this is a really nice, quite crisp and just straight shooting IPA, this one. Quite crisp, quite zesty leaning. And it's got a nice kind of floral component to it. So thumbs up to Ängö once again. They've created something solid here, and I get enthusiastic about these, as you can probably tell from the length of the review. But yeah, let's round off with the mouthfeel then. Overall, I would say that this beer is quite, you know, it's kind of toward the light end of mid-bodied. The carbonation has a degree of crispness to it in this one. There is a wee bit of slickness to the beer. It does develop a little bit of sweetness, as I say, the further you go into the aftertaste, and that aids the slickness. So quite slick, quite crisp at the same time. Soft, you know, a little bit of crisp carbonation. But yeah, it's just a nice drinkable beer, this one overall. In terms of the IBUs, I think this is a fairly standard 30, maybe at a push 40 IBUs. Like I say, you do get a wee bit of kind of floral aromaticity and spiciness out of this one the further that you go into it. The malt base is smooth and crisp underneath, but it gets a wee bit sweeter the further on you go, and there's some nice juicy and oily fruits in there, but it leans more towards a kind of citrusy, zesty sort of thing. But yeah, it's a very nice beer, this one, and it's kind of got a similar vibe to the other ones that we've had from Ängö before. So these guys do have a little bit of a signature thing, a wee bit of an oily kind of sweetness in the malt base. I think that for me is the kind of signature of Ängö, and that's both from their tap beers and from the bottled IPAs, both the New Englands and the West Coasters that we've had from them. But yeah, this is pretty nice, this one. It is pretty nice actually, so it's worth checking out if you're a fan of New Zealand hops, as I am. But I think we can round off this review there. So yeah, let's leave it at that. So this one is the Ängö New Zealand IPA, 6.5% ABV from Ängö Kvartersbryggeri in Kalmar. Really nice beer, this one. I've enjoyed reviewing it for you, so I hope that you guys have enjoyed the video too. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Ängö Kvartersbryggeri. We will return to these guys at some point, I'm sure. Check out their social media, check out my social media, and I'll see you guys again soon. See you on the next review. Slàinte, skål, and cheers.